Ben Brooks, it's a pleasure to have you as our guest and to spend the next minutes talking about your books, translated also into Romanian and published by Litera Publishing House. Stories for Boys Who Dare to Be Different, Volume 1 and 2. And of course, our discussion will also lead us to some other books of yours, because in spite of the fact that you're still very young, you already have a pretty important number of books already published. Now, I was going to ask you, since obviously the teenage years represent a vivid point of interest to you, and you keep coming back to this particular time into someone else's life. How was your adolescence that made you so interested in writing about others' adolescence?
Yeah, thanks, and hi everyone. Yeah, I think the thing about adolescence is, of course, that it's the kind of, you'll never feel anything as strongly as you do during adolescence. It's kind of the emotional peak of everything. Everything feels huge and exciting and massive. And at the time, you have no real sense of that. It's only kind of in retrospect when you realize what a kind of strange and special time it is compared to what the rest of your life is going to be. And I think for me, my adolescence was a fairly messy period in various ways. And it's an interesting one for everyone, because you're kind of, especially later on, digging into it and really learning about the kind of neurological reasons that at that age you start taking risks and you start pushing back against your parents and you start behaving in these strange ways that to you feel perfectly logical, and to the kind of grown-ups of the world, oh, it's the teenager being a teenager again. There's just something very interesting about that kind of transitory period where we're, I guess, essentially becoming who we will be as adults, but it's a kind of a tough, messy process.
Well, I remember a study that I have come across a few years ago, published in The Lancet, actually, where it was discussed this particular moment in everyone's life in terms of knowledge accumulation, compared to the first childhood. Adolescence would be probably the most fruitful time in one's life for accumulating knowledge about everything that happens around us.
Yeah, we're really taking everything in, not just lessons at school, but literally how to function in relationships, whether they're romantic or friendships, and how to function with adults, how to deal with your parents. You're really learning kind of all the tools you'll need to function in the world as an adult, I suppose.
Indeed. Now, let's talk a bit about being different, because one of the fears, I would say, of most teenagers is actually this one, feeling different.
Yeah, it's a strange one, because feeling different is the kind of last thing you want, especially when you're in secondary school or school at all. And then once you leave school, you realize that it's exactly your differences that are going to make you succeed in whatever area you go into. You need your differences if you're going to do well in anything. So I think differences are something that you kind of really resent as a younger person, and then often come to really embrace when you're older, and you realize how much these are the things that will make you stand out and help you get on in life.
Do you draw a certain line between being different and actually feeling different?
I think they can go hand in hand. I suppose they're different sides of a coin. When you are different, maybe you have a different area of interest to everyone else in your school, or you do things in a different way. And when you feel different, I suppose that could boil down to being kind of ostracized, not out of your choice, which of course is a different thing. And I think there's a difference between being different and being kind of isolated. And obviously, I think in different ways we all need connection, especially at that time. And it can be the most painful thing when you feel as though you're not part of something else. So yeah, I think there's a balance there between being different and having the kind of feeling free within yourself to pursue your own ambitions and interests, and also not feeling kind of isolated and cut off from everyone else because of it.
Now, from Nelson Mandela to Stephen Hawking, and from Jamie Oliver to Messi himself, the famed soccer player, your books represent a collection of stories of men, famous or not necessarily that famous, that have succeeded in crossing these boundaries within themselves, I would say. Now, before asking you in which way you made their selection, I would go back to your teenage years again and ask you if it happened to you to feel different, and how much of that experience you brought into your books.
Yeah, I think for me, I definitely had a sense of not quite connecting with most of the people at school and not really feeling interested in what they were interested in or what they were doing. And this tended to manifest in kind of, well, not going to school for a long period of time, just going to the library to read and write instead. That was what I wanted to do. And just kind of burrowing into that world instead. And then it also involved finding a community elsewhere, like a community of writers who were, in America and elsewhere. I think it's important to find some kind of connection, even if it's not in school. So yeah, I felt different, and I suppose writing about things was a way of coping with that, and then of connecting with other people who made a bit more sense to me.
As I was saying, there is a plethora of accounts about famous and not so famous boys developing into men in your books. How did you make their selection?
Well, yeah, it was a tough, big, long, strange process that just really involved reading about hundreds and hundreds of people. And sometimes, you'd have recommendations for people, and sometimes you had some favorite people that you knew and wanted to dig around a bit more. And the kind of criteria for inclusion were always, I think, that they had to in some way go against the grain of something, or stand out in their field in a way that was kind of exceptional. So for example, you couldn't just have someone who's good at football, but you could have someone like Marcus Rashford or Messi who was good at football, and then within that had used the kind of influence and fame that they'd gained to help others, essentially. And so the idea was to find people who embodied certain traits that sometimes aren't traditionally connected to masculinity. So whether it's kind of very open kindness, or kind of being open about your emotions, or going into areas that sometimes aren't connected with the masculinity so much, like kind of dance and poetry and things like this. So it's just about celebrating the kind of men, but also the aspects of men that are not always so widely celebrated.
Are there particular examples or male figures that you specifically relate to within this selection that you have made?
And I relate to is an interesting one. Normally people ask which are your favorite ones, and that's slightly easier. But the relate to ones, I think there's all different aspects.
I'm not a man of easy questions.
I think there's different aspects to a lot of them, like a lot of the kids that start younger and do amazing things. I wish I could relate to them because I did amazing things when I was younger, which is not necessarily the case, but I can relate to kind of not quite fitting in at school and instead kind of burrowing into a very specific area that you really loved. And I'm desperately trying to think of a good example. I can't, sorry.
You ventured also into fiction with The Impossible Boy, another, let's say, facet of this coming of age interest that you particularly show when it comes to writing, of course. Now, I would underline the importance and also the unique traits of this English syntagm, coming of age. Now, there is something always evolving in this particular syntagm. Tell me more about this impossible boy and his coming of age.
Yeah, so The Impossible Boy is a novel about two friends, a boy and a girl, who are on the cusp of leaving what we call in England junior school, before you make the leap into secondary school. So you're about 11 years old, and they're kind of facing this weird threshold where they know they're going to be going to this new school, and they're going to be going to different places, and you know, they've been best friends since they were very young, so they don't quite know how to talk about this or how to deal with this. And then this completely impossible, strange boy that they've made up when they were bored in a lesson kind of just appears in their lives and ends up taking them on this kind of insane adventure, during which time they start to process the fact that, that things are going to be changing, and maybe that's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just the way of things, that things are always changing, and that doesn't mean, you know, it's an end for their friendship. It just means, that the world moves on.
I'm going to quote another title of yours. Not all heroes wear capes. If not capes, what other thing?
Normal human clothes, I suppose. Yeah,
of course.
Hats, shoes, whatever they like.
Because they're actually the heroes next door, or simply just passing by us. Yes,
and there's actually one interesting story in there that connects to that a little bit, which was I need to remember the specifics. You end up with hundreds and hundreds of people. But there was a young chap who went to a sporting event, I think, over in the Philippines, and he was on the bus with some of his teammates, and he just sees a woman on the bus with no shoes on, and just sort of without thinking just takes off his shoes and gives his shoes to the woman, and then they leave the bus. And I think those kind of tiny little moments of kindness are the things that it's nice to celebrate, because when we just celebrate the kind of insane superheroes from the cinema screens, you just kind of think, well, they're superheroes and I'm not, so they do that stuff and I don't. But I think if we praise the kind of small acts of kindness committed by people every day, then we're more likely to see more of them.
Now, Ben, spontaneous curiosity right now. Would you say there is a certain pattern of the hero or the superhero for today's youngsters?
I think we definitely are living in an age where I don't know how it is in Romania. I presume it's the same as it is, but in the UK, for example, most boys will say that it's footballers or YouTubers who are kind of their heroes, quote unquote, and then also they have the literal heroes of the Marvel superhero films, and
there you go, yes,
and these different facets of it, and it's
so far we are on the same field.
Yeah, and these, I mean, you can see that they're increasingly trying to do different things with superheroes, but they're not that different, really. I mean, they're still kind of big, physically strong people who are changing the world by fighting the bad guys, which is just not, which is good for these kind of stories, but it's not how we function as human beings in society. We don't, when we're faced with evil people, generally fight them in any reasonable way. And so showing the other ways in which we can commit heroic acts, I think is probably useful.
What would you say that are the main challenges for teenagers today?
Well, I also wrote a book about this that was kind of a difficult one to get into, and I spoke to a lot of young people trying to figure it out, and essentially everything was boiling down, of course, to how being kind of constantly online impacts your life, how it impacts your relationships, how it impacts your mental health, how it impacts your development. And over the past couple of years, we've just had a complete spanner thrown in the works. But I think 2 years ago, a lot of parents were feeling kind of strange about the amount of time their kids were spending online, and a lot of people are taking steps to figuring out how to limit the amount of time their children spend online or spend it in more productive ways. And then during the past 2 years, you haven't been able to tell your children not to go online because that's the only place their friends have been. That's the only way they've been able to communicate. That's the only way they've been able to go to school. So that's kind of all gone out of the window. But I think, there will be an age when we have to really, truly reevaluate how and whether these apps that are so embedded in our lives are impacting them positively or not. And I think they make it incredibly difficult to navigate growing up now, because I think aspects of growing up now as they pertain to the internet, kids almost can't turn to their parents for help because their parents have no idea what this stuff is. They have no idea how it operates. They didn't go through the same thing. A 45-year-old now didn't have to worry about sending nude pictures when he was when he was 15. So it's a kind of difficult stuff to navigate.
Addressing youngsters of different cultures, different backgrounds, even different countries, have you noticed a change or a shift in their main concerns?
Well, of course, there's the thing now of more and more young people becoming politically engaged, partly because of the climate crisis. And that, on one level, that's obviously wonderful and necessary because the people in charge now are not doing what they need to do. But on another level, it's kind of obviously, it's a big burden to carry when, it's a difficult enough time as it is being a young person and kind of trying to figure out who you are and how you exist in the world. But at the same time, having to worry about whether the world's going to end before you become an adult makes it doubly difficult, I imagine.
Now, let's change our point of view for an instant, because I believe that you equally talk to parents as much as you talk to their children. What do parents tell you about their kids?
I think the thing that comes back, there's different things. I mean, the parents of teenagers often say that they're worried and that there's a lot of things that they don't understand. And sometimes they'll be so certain that they know their kids, and then they'll find out an aspect of their online lives that completely throws everything into a new light. But then I think with a lot of parents these days, what seems to be the case is that they're just really kind of pleasantly surprised by how engaged their children are with what's going on in the world and how much they really sit down and think about what's happening out there and what they can do to positively impact it. So I think, parents are more and more positively surprised by how willing their kids are to engage with the world and try to look for ways to make it better.
Well, you're not that far of the teenage years yourself. You're still very young. But I would try to ask you, what do you feel different now from, let's say, 15 to 20 years ago?
I feel
apart the technology and the communication being this online, this living online thing.
Yeah. What do I feel has changed in the world or in myself?
Yes.
In the first one.
What do you feel different from your teenage years compared to teenagers today?
Yeah, I think again it ties in with the kind of political awareness of things. This wasn't when I look back on my kind of cohort when I was younger, there was no real sense of kind of anxiety about the way the world was unfolding, I think. Mm-hmm. I mean, there was the news was just kind of something your parents read and worried about, and you worried about, being picked for the football team and your girlfriend and all these kind of things. And there was no, you would maybe chat about things, but there was no real sense of urgency there. There was no real sense of anxiety about what was happening in the world at large. And I think now, there just is this kind of big anxiety on top of everything else about how things are going.
You're an author, you write books, and almost everyone seems to be complaining that youngsters today do not read, or do not read as much as we used to. So how do you find that particular authorship tactics, let's say, in order to keep their interest focused on a book not an electronic device?
Yeah, I think it's a kind of, when people say that they're reading less, maybe they are, because there's a lot more exciting stuff going on in the phone a lot of the time. And that's what you have to compete with now.
Exactly.
Yeah, if you want to get away from that, you have to make something even better than that, and that is of course difficult. But I think it pushes people to write in new and exciting ways, and you have to figure out either a new way of telling a story or telling a story that's so compelling that they forget that they have a phone or a PlayStation over there. I think the reason that the Stories for Boys books work so well is because they kind of look very accessible. You have a page portrait of the person, then you have essentially a page biography of them, and kids will sort of look at it and go, that's a small chunk, and that's interesting enough to read. And then once you read one, you're like, oh, well, I'll read another one now, and you just get into it that way. In the same way, almost that TikTok video is so short, but you'll look at one and then you'll go, oh, another one now, oh, another one now, and you just keep going like that, rather than being faced with a huge chunk of text and thinking, well, that's a bit much. It's about kind of chopping things down, I think, more and more.
Now, Ben, a tricky question now. What would you tell your parents today about Ben 15 years ago?
That they shouldn't worry about him, because he's going to figure it all out, and it may be a kind of rocky road, but he will get somewhere a little safer and healthier eventually. Yeah.
And keeping the same note and the same exercise of imagination, let's say, if given the chance to a new adolescence now, what would you tell yourself?
This is probably not the answer you were looking for, but I would just tell myself to eat better food, because I just ate the worst possible things ever. And I think, every day I'd go and buy a thing like this of cookies, and that would be breakfast. And then at lunch would be a huge amount of chips. I know this is not a very romantic answer, but I think that really...
I didn't expect a romantic answer. I'm looking for a candid and honest one, actually.
That's the one. I think you don't think about it at the time, because that's just not important to you, but it kind of, you can't concentrate in school, then you don't sleep well, you get grumpy, you get irritated. And so I think that would be one. The food thing would be one. And then the other one would be, I suppose, just to try and enjoy things better. I mean, that's the kind of thing that people always say, that you look back and see those times as kind of really wonderful, even though when you're in them, it's really difficult to kind of pause and enjoy them, because you've got nothing else to compare it to. But I think, just trying to kind of take notice of everything and enjoy it.
I think also our conversation also revolves around the idea of education, because as I was saying earlier, adolescence is a fruitful time to gather all the knowledge, or much of the knowledge you are going to need further on in your life. But if we leave school aside, I mean this institutionalized way of learning, what other, let's say, healthy and good way to learn is there for a teenager today?
Well, the kind of wonderful thing about being a teenager, of course, is the flip side of the internet, that you can kind of dig in, and anything that interests you can find out as much as you want about it. And there are free full university courses online that you can sit down and do on your own. Is that, can you hear that?
No, it's okay. I don't hear it.
Okay, there's full university courses that you can access, and you can really do this self-directed learning. The trouble, of course, with the internet, again, is this issue that everyone has, trying to discern what you should read and how you should judge it. I think the kind of one of the most important things, I was lucky enough when I was in school that we had a lesson that was an optional lesson that you could take a period of time called critical thinking. And the point of this lesson was to really learn how to evaluate information, the sources it came from, and whether or not, how to weigh it against other things, and how to take it, and how to look for truth amongst things. And I think that's kind of incredibly crucial. And I'm surprised that it's not already a quite a major part of most school curricula because it seems so vital for children now to be able to discern the facts about the various things they're being told.
Ben, I won't leave you go without a message for your Romanian readers.
Okay. Hello, readers in Romania. I'm hugely grateful that you've picked up the books, and it's so wonderful to be able to chat to you. And hopefully when the pandemic and everything settles down a bit, we'll eventually get to meet each other in person.
Fingers crossed to that. Thank you so much, Ben. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you too.
Thank you.
Thanks.